The show pony. Let's start with the loudest one in the room. The show pony was raised to be the family's walking advertisement. The designer wardrobe, the debut party, the perfectly curated feed, all quietly funded by parents who treat their kid less like a child and more like a brand ambassador for the family name. Nothing about their life is accidental. The outfits are approved, the vacations are photogenic on purpose, and the birthday parties are less celebrations than they are quarterly marketing events with a cake somewhere in the background. They learn early that appearing successful is a full-time responsibility and that a bad photo is practically a corporate scandal. Every post is a press release, which sounds exhausting because it is. And somewhere underneath all the sponsorship and staging, there's a person who has genuinely never once posted a single thing just for themselves. Chapter 2. The safety net kid. And here's the exact opposite of the show pony, because this one you'd never spot in a crowd. The safety net kid isn't handed a fortune or a trust fund or anything you could point to on a bank statement. They're handed something quieter and arguably far more powerful, the guarantee that they can never truly fail. Take the risky job, start the doomed company, move across the country with no plan and no backup. Because if the whole thing collapses, there's a childhood bedroom waiting with the bed already made and the fridge already stocked. They get to gamble with a stack of chips they physically cannot lose, while everyone around them is nervously playing with rent money and next month's electricity bill. The advantage never shows up in a photo, never gets mentioned out loud, and never feels like privilege from the inside, which is exactly why it's the most invisible head start on this entire list. Chapter 3. The Cutoff Kid. The Cutoff Kid grew up comfortably wealthy, but somewhere deep in the fine print of the family fortune, there's an expiration date, a specific birthday, a graduation, a vague once you're on your feet that the whole family treats as a real and legally binding contract. So they spend their early 20s enjoying a lifestyle they secretly know comes with a shut-off valve, savoring the good years while quietly refusing to think too hard about the cliff at the end of them. Some try to build something before the deadline hits. Most simply enjoy the view and hope the date gets pushed. Either way, it's a strange way to live. A bit like renting a mansion, you're slowly being evicted from on a timeline nobody in the family is willing to say out loud at dinner. Chapter 4. The Silent Heir. The Silent Heir sits on genuine generational money but was raised to treat mentioning it as a kind of minor moral crime. So they wear plain, forgettable clothes, they split every bill down to the exact cent, and they let you comfortably assume they're just as broke as everyone else at the table. The car is deliberately unremarkable, the apartment is smaller than it strictly needs to be, and the vacation photos are suspiciously modest for someone whose family quietly owns a meaningful slice of an actual bank. This isn't humility exactly, it's a trained reflex, a belief passed down that looking rich is vulgar and being rich is a secret you keep from the world and occasionally from yourself. The whole personality ends up built around not being found out, which makes them the only rich kid whose primary life skill is convincingly pretending the money simply isn't there. Chapter 5. The Allowance Lifer. Most kids get an allowance for a while, and then eventually, life hands them a job. The Allowance Lifer quietly skips that entire second part. Their income is a monthly transfer from parents that continues smoothly well past the age where anyone else would still be calling it pocket money, funding the apartment, the groceries, the hobbies, and a career that is permanently and optimistically described as figuring things out. It isn't a trust fund because a trust fund at least pretends to be a system with rules and a document behind it. This is just a faucet with a person attached to the other end of it. And the real danger of the arrangement is that the faucet has feelings and opinions, which means it can be turned off without warning during any sufficiently tense holiday dinner about someone's life choices. Chapter 6. The Legacy Admit. The Legacy Admit walks into an elite school through a door their family built and paid for decades earlier. A building with the family name carved into it, a grandfather smiling down from the donor wall, an admissions office that suddenly and conveniently remembers exactly how much it values tradition and continuity. Once safely inside, they'll insist with total sincerity that they earned the spot fair and square, right up until someone gently points out that fair and square rarely involves a wing of the library named after your bloodline. The genuinely sad part is that some of them are smart enough to have gotten in on their own merits anyway. But nobody will ever quite believe that. And worst of all, neither will they, usually somewhere around 3 in the morning during finals week. Chapter 7. The Rehab Rich Kid. Not that kind of rehab, the Sebastião. This is the one the family has quietly decided to fix. The Rehab Rich Kid burned through a mountain of goodwill, or a business, or a truly heroic amount of the family's patience, and is now on a carefully managed comeback tour, a job invented specifically for them, a title with an impressive sound, and no actual duties. A second chance elegantly packaged as a hard-won opportunity. Everyone involved describes the whole thing as growth and maturity and lessons learned, which is a remarkably generous way to describe being handed the exact same advantages a second time with a slightly firmer handshake. For most people, failure is where the story ends. For this kid, failure just quietly triggers the reset button that the rest of us were never even told existed. Chapter 8: The Crypto Prince. The Crypto Prince took a modest gift from comfortably wealthy parents and turned it into a genuinely enormous number on a screen, and has since decided that this makes them a self-made financial genius rather than a person who was simply handed the entry fee to a casino that happened to pay out that particular year. They speak almost entirely in charts, they explain the global economy to people who very much did not ask, and the original source of the starting capital is the one small detail that never quite survives the retelling of the story. What they actually did was place a bold bet using someone else's money, which is a perfectly fine thing to do, right up until the moment you start giving confident keynote speeches to strangers about discipline, patience, and the importance of believing in yourself. Chapter 9: The Guilt Giver. The Guilt Giver grew up rich, felt genuinely strange about it somewhere around age 19, and now spends an enormous amount of energy proving to everyone that they are, in fact, one of the good ones. They give generously, they mention the giving often, and they treat their own privilege as a fascinating and important conversation topic that they, purely by coincidence, always end up leading. There's real sincerity buried somewhere in the middle of it, which is precisely what makes the whole thing so complicated to criticize. But the generosity almost always arrives wrapped in a quiet, unspoken request for you to notice and acknowledge how admirably self-aware they're being about the entire situation. It's kindness with a tip jar attached, and the tip they're hoping for is your visible, ongoing admiration. Chapter 10: The Blank Slate. And finally, the rarest one of them all. The kid who was born directly into every possible advantage and somehow came out the other side without a category to put them in. The blank slate has the money, the network, the connections, and the safety net, but treats absolutely none of it as a personality trait. They took a normal, unglamorous job that nobody was pressured into arranging. They don't perform their wealth for attention, and they don't hide it out of shame either. They'll mention the trust fund, if it ever comes up at all, with roughly the same casual energy as mentioning that they happen to be left-handed. It's genuinely disorienting to meet one, because we've all been quietly trained to expect wealth to do something visible to a person. Inflating them, hiding them, twisting them into one of the shapes on this list. So a rich kid who simply turned out completely fine feels almost suspicious, like a magic trick performed with no visible mechanism anywhere, which, when you really think about it, might just be the rarest inheritance of all, getting quietly handed the entire world, and still somehow managing to stay a completely normal person about it. Please subscribe.